Forget the golden sunsets. Forget the cowboy heroics riding into the horizon. Hollywood sold you a lie. In 1876, the American dream was not a grand adventure. For the thousands of families lured to the Great Plains by the Homestead Act, claiming their free 160 acres of land meant stepping directly into a living purgatory. This is the untold story of the pioneers. A story written not in gold, but in dirt, blood, and a creeping, silent madness. Before the sun rose over the flat, endless horizon, the cold had seeped to her very bones. It was 1876, somewhere on the harsh plains of Nebraska. She took a deep breath. The air had no scent of fresh pine or dew. It smelled of damp earth and old sweat. She was waking up in a dilapidated mud-built house, piles of earth and prairie grass stacked one on top of the other. Each time the wind howled, a fine dust fell from the ceiling, clinging to her face, hair, and the children huddled beside her. She sat up quietly. The damp earthen floor was icy cold. There was no firewood. The plains were barren, devoid of trees. To survive the bone-chilling morning, she went outside to gather dried cow dung, dried animal manure. She placed the dried dung in the small fireplace and struck a flint. Once, twice, the dung caught fire, producing thick black smoke. The pungent stench of burning manure permeated the small, cramped room. It stung her eyes and clung to her tattered woolen clothes. But in this harsh environment, that foul smoke was the only thing separating her family from freezing to death. The sun rose, but it wasn't beautiful. It was harsh, a blinding white, casting its light on a flat, treeless plain. The woman and her husband were working in the field. By midday, the morning chill had become a distant memory, replaced by a scorching, merciless heat. The land grant law promised them land, but it hadn't told them the soil here was as hard as iron. A close-up of the husband's hands, blistered and bleeding as he struggled with the heavy iron plow. The wife followed behind, sowing seeds in the unplowed soil. Their hands were calloused, cracked, and covered in dried blood and mud. The prairie grass had roots as thick as steel wire, painfully resisting the plow little by little. They worked in silence. Talking took too much energy. Energy they didn't have. Each incessant prairie wind blew, carrying a suffocating cloud of fine dust into the air. The woman paused, pulled a dirty rag from her pocket, and wiped her face. She coughed, a dry, painful cough. The brilliant sun began to fade. The woman looked up, a shadow gliding across her face. The light turned a strange, unnatural yellowish green, but the hard work and the scorching heat were things they could endure. They were invisible enemies. What happened next was terrifying. A small, distant buzzing began to rise in the air. It grew louder and louder, turning into a deafening, mechanical screech. The sky turned pitch black. It wasn't a storm cloud obscuring the sun. It was a living thing. A swarm of Rocky Mountain locusts. Trillions of them. A colossal swarm, larger than the state of California. The sound was deafening. A roar like a giant waterfall cascading from the sky. The insects fell like hailstones. The woman and her husband desperately tried to cover the crops with cloth, waving it in the air. But the numbers were overwhelming. They came crashing down with a terrifying, crunching sound. They covered the ground several inches thick. They covered houses. They covered people. And then they began to eat. They didn't just eat corn and wheat. They devoured clothes hanging on the clotheslines. They ate raw sheep's wool. They even ate the
It's all
wooden
gone.
handles of plows.
What am I supposed
The
to
sound
do
of
now?
millions of tiny jaws gnawing at the world was a nightmare that would haunt her mind for the rest of her life. In just a few hours, the fruits of a year's hard labor, their only hope of surviving the winter, had vanished. Only bare, chewed tree trunks remained. The landscape was eerily silent, covered in an endless expanse of white snow. The cottage was almost completely buried. How could one survive when the land offered nothing? You would starve. You would have to share a single potato for 3 days. You would boil weeds. You would watch the flesh melt from your child's bones. But as winter tightened, bringing blizzards that sent temperatures plummeting to 40 degrees below zero, a new invisible enemy emerged in the cottage. It was called the madness of the prairie. Inside the cottage, it was dark and cold. The woman sat in the corner, staring at the wall. The wind howled fiercely outside. There were no neighbors within miles, no trees to break the landscape, only an endless ocean of white, and that sound, the wind. It screamed through the cracks in the mud walls. It never stopped. A day and night, a relentless, piercing scream. Their husbands, desperate, went hunting. The women, left alone in these dark earthen caves, gradually went mad. The suffocating feeling, the deafening wind, the hunger, the overwhelming loneliness, all destroyed their minds. Some simply stopped speaking. Others stepped out into the freezing snowstorm, letting the snow engulf them, choosing the silence of death over the howling of the steppe. She sat beside the embers of a sawdust-fueled fire. She looked exhausted, broken, but her eyes reflected a terrifying resilience. The frontier wasn't conquered by sharpshooting outlaws or romantic heroes. It was conquered by those who had endured the unbearable. Earth-eating people, disease-fighting people, people clinging to their sanity by a thin, creaky thread in the darkness. Every road, every town, every field in the modern American Midwest was built on their silent suffering. They paid with their lives so a nation could prosper. The screen faded to black, leaving only the crackling sound of the fire. History is often written by the victors, but the truth is buried in the mud. If this authentic look at the past changes the way you see the Wild West, hit the subscribe button. We'll be exploring hidden, unforgotten corners of history every week. Let me know in the comments below. Could you survive a winter in a thatched cottage in 1876?